Subscribe Nightmare Network and press the bell icon to listen horror and scary stories regularly.
I always liked luxury apartments in front of a busy road. It started when I found a new apartment in the New York City. I was really happy that I got a luxury apartment in a very reasonable price. When I met my landlord first, he seemed like a very decent guy, but it was not real. I was really impressed by his look and his style of speaking. I am feeling scared and anxious telling you my story, but anyways. My office timing was from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. Yes, it was in the morning time. One night I was coming back from my work in the morning time, like it was round above, I think 4:20 a.m., and I was really tired and stressed that night. I was feeling very strange and anxious that night. I don't know why, but there was something bad going to happen. After entering the building, there were some low voices, like a lot of people were crying and begging for help. As I moved further, I heard a clear voice of someone. He was looking in pain and begging, "Please leave us, what we did to you, why you are doing this." I was shocked and my body froze there. I ignored it and thought that it must be hallucinations due to tiredness, but as I took my first step towards the stairs, I realized that the voices were coming from the landlord office. I stepped up to the landlord's office, where the spooky cries that echoed throughout the building came from, with shaky hands. With the crushing weight of the unknown pressing down on me with every step, it seemed like I was sliding into craziness. I stopped as I approached the landlord's office door, my mind racing with anxiety and doubt. What dark mysteries existed beyond those walls? Gathering all my bravery, I pushed the door open and entered. The air was thick and there was a very bad smell, and the room was poorly lighted by those creepy-looking candles. There was a red circle in the middle of the room, and some peoples were gathered in that circle, but those peoples were in a very bad condition. There was blood everywhere. My eyes were seeing the room, and suddenly it stopped at a point. The landlord was standing in the middle of the room. He turned to face me, his eyes were red and glowing. He said, "Ah, my dear tenant," with a tone that was filled with honeyed rage. "So nice of you to join us." I jerked away in terror, my head spinning with unbelief. How did I end myself in this situation? By renting this property, had I unintentionally fallen into some sort of evil pact? However, the landlord spoke again in a low, difficult voice before I could say anything further. He laughed broadly as he spoke. "You've fallen upon something you were never meant to see. But don't worry, my love. You will not make it out of here alive." With that, I realized I was in serious danger as he threw himself forward, his hands outstretched like claws. I turned and ran, the landlord's laughing booming in my ears like a terrible refrain, my pulse racing through my chest as I rushed down the corridor. I floated onto the hard surface and struggled for breath as I broke out into the cold night air. I managed to up myself and started to run out of that area. The landlord was still running behind me, but I managed to get out of that building and never looked back again. I was running like a crazy. After running for such a long time, I dared to look behind myself, and I was in relief that there was no one coming behind me. I thank to God, but I am still in questions that who were those peoples lying there in that circle, and what was the landlord doing with them?
Lying under a torn blanket, I could feel the night's coolness coming through my tiny apartment's broken windows. Although I've never been a great sleeper, lately, even the slightest sound would cause my heart to race with anticipation. The creaks and grumblings of the ancient structure and the distant buzz of traffic weren't the only things that kept me awake at night. It was something much darker, lying just outside my awareness, ready to strike. It all began when I moved into this flat, caught in by the temptation of affordable rent and an easy location. At first, the landlord appeared to be an inviting middle-aged man who shook hands firmly and smiled warmly. He gave me a tour of the facility, pointing out its features and assuring me that I would feel right at home here. However, as the weeks passed, I started to notice strange events. A floorboard that made shaking noises in the silence of night outside my door, and a light in the corridor that seemed to flicker on and off constantly. I dismissed it at first as the unique characteristics of an ancient structure, but the strange feeling persisted and grew stronger every day. And then I saw him one night. It was far after midnight, and I had spent hours rolling around in bed, unable to get rid of the uneasy sense that someone was watching me. I got up and walked barefoot down the hallway to the kitchen to grab a drink of water. I noticed some movement outside the window as I was walking by. As I looked through the glass, my breath caught in my throat and my heart missed a beat. The landlord was standing there, in the darkness of the street below. I froze, horror and confusion flashing through my mind. Why he was standing outside my window at this hour of the night? He looked up at the building, his eyes moving across the dark windows as if he was looking for something, and I watched in terror. With my shaky and trembling body, I moved away from the window and grabbed for the phone to contact the police. But I heard it before I could even dial the number. A quiet, terrifying whisper that echoed through the night's quietness. Come out, wherever you are." I let go of the phone, my blood freezing in my veins. Even though it was clearly the landlord's voice, there was something strange and ominous about it that made my spine tingle. I was shocked. I walked back to the window and looked through the curtains once more. The landlord had disappeared, disappearing into the night. But the sense of approaching doom remained like a massive weight bearing down on me from all directions. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, too afraid to move or even breathe. I became terrified by the sound of the floors squeaking and the wind shaking the windows because I thought he was still out there, watching my window. Next day, I went to the police station. They told me that it is impossible and it must be just an imagination of my thoughts. They said there was no evidence of wrongdoing, no reason to suspect the landlord of any nefarious activity. I attempted to ignore it and carry on with my daily activities as if nothing had happened, but the sensation of being watched never left me. It was a constant presence that tortured me every waking moment. However, I knew the truth. I had seen him, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, hiding outside my window in the dead of night, his eyes shining with malice. And then he came one night. I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer to my door. I held my breath, listening carefully as the door creaked open and the handle twisted. There he stood, the landlord, his face twisted into a creepy smile. In his hand he held a sharp and big knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight streaming through the window. His eyes angry with fire. "Oh, God help me!" I screamed as he jumped towards me. But a miracle happened before he could get to me. The room was filled with a magnificent brightness as the lights flickered on, pushing away the darkness that had enveloped us. The landlord had disappeared, as if he had never been there at all, and I had blinked in surprise, protecting my eyes from the unexpected light. I stumbled out of bed and opened the window to let in the refreshing night air, my legs trembling under me. However, there was no sign of him, or the horror that had been haunting me for so long. I moved out of that apartment in the days that followed, trying to put the horrors of the past behind me. However, the memory of that evening followed me everywhere I went, acting as a continuous warning of the danger that lies just outside the boundaries of reality. And I can't help but wonder as I sit here right now, in my new house distant from that location. Was everything only a dream?
The apartment building stood against the night sky like a scary guard, its black windows reflecting the haunting light of the lamps below. The hairs on the back of my neck pricked and I shivered and felt nervous as I walked through the main doors. Moving to a new place always causes me anxiety, but there was something about this structure that truly frightened me. The landlord greeted me rudely and clammily, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. He seems quite kind, although a bit too anxious to get me registered and settled. But I couldn't get rid of the uneasiness, that something was not right there. The apartment itself was small and poorly lighted, with an unpleasant smell of mold and rot in the air. The landlord promised that with a little care and attention, it would quickly feel like home. However, a creeping worry came into my mind as I examined the damaged flooring and peeling wallpaper. I heard it that night while I laid in bed in the dark. An ongoing, gentle tapping sounding like fingers on glass on the window. I stopped, heart racing in my chest, and paid close attention to the sound as it became louder and more frantic. I forced myself to get up and investigate, my hand trembling as I reached for the curtain. But when I pulled it back, there was nothing there, just the empty street below and the distant hum of traffic. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the glass. But the tapping continued, a continual reminder that I was not alone in that dark and empty place. The tapping continued over the days and weeks, getting louder and more furious every night. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew there was something more sinister at play. One night, I decided to address the landlord because I was unable to take it more longer. With a mix of terror and fury in my heart, I marched downstairs to his office and demanded to know what was going on. But when I arrived, the office was empty, the door hanging open on its hinges. I screamed out to him, but there was no response, just the echoing emptiness of the building. I heard footsteps softly behind me at that moment. I turned, my breath catching in my throat, and saw him standing there in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with malice. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with a weird smile as I backed away. I turned and ran, the sound of his laughter echoing in my ears as I raced up the stairs to my apartment. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it tight, my hands shaking with fear. But even as I surrounded myself inside, I knew it was useless. He was out there, waiting for his chance to take me. I camped out in my room's corner all night, staring at the door like he would suddenly break through at any second. However, the hours passed in terrible quiet, but he still hadn't arrived. Finally, daylight came, and I stepped out into the corridor, my pulse thumping in my chest, and moved my way over to the landlord's office. However, the door was locked and closed when I got there, exactly like it had been earlier. My fingers hovered over the doorknob for a time before I pulled up the courage to turn it. The office was empty, just as it had been the night before, with no sign of the landlord or his creepy smile. I searched the building from top to bottom, but there was no trace of him anywhere. It was as if he had never been there at all. I made an effort to forget about the event and convince myself that it was only a horrific dream. However, the image of those sinister footsteps and that sick smile stayed with me. These thoughts and images always remind me of that dark night. Sometimes I question myself, is there anything worse going on in that building, or was it all simply a hallucination? One thing is certain, but only time will tell. My landlord will never seem the same to me.